Hello and welcome back to another episode of You Want to Do What with Dan and Julie. Today we have Frederic on, who is a portrait photographer. Hi, Frederic.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Julie.
How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. I can't believe I'm the first photographer you've had on here.
Yeah, well, actually, we've got a landscape photographer episode coming out in a couple of weeks, but you're the
Okay.
first a portrait photographer. Yeah, very excited.
Nice.
So do you want to tell everyone a little bit about what you actually do, Frederic?
Yes, so I take pictures of people for a living, and I love doing it every single day. It's just the best job in the world, really. I specialize in portraiture, but also in group portraits, which I would say is quite a challenge in itself because coordinating large groups of people is usually quite tricky, but I really enjoy that challenge.
So where did this love for photography come from?
Actually, I didn't train as a photographer. I'm self-taught. So I come from Switzerland, from Geneva, and I came to the UK 20 odd years ago to study Japanese at Oxford. And it was during that time that I took up photography as a hobby, and then it became an all-encompassing sort of lifestyle choice, and it became my passion and what I eventually did once I graduated. So yeah, that's I'm self-taught, and I'm really glad that I studied Japanese actually, because it's helped me a lot in the photography, believe it or not. Yeah, photography, I started when I actually started taking pictures of my mom when my parents were divorcing, and it was just a way to distract her, to kind of make her feel good at a time when she wasn't feeling too good. And I realized that there was something there that was truly helping her, but also it was helping me to be creative, because I had been quite sort of active in the art room and in high school, painting and drawing. But once I got to Oxford, I had much less time to sort of draw and paint. So photography was a much quicker medium. At least I thought so at first. It was a much quicker medium at that time to produce images, and my mum was a willing guinea pig at the beginning. And then I sort of started photographing friends and fellow students at university who all needed pictures for whatever careers in theatre, etc., and also for the student publications. And by the time I graduated university, I had a portfolio that I used to get jobs in London.
Why do you think you started off doing self-portraits? Oh, no, sorry, photographing portraits. I think for most people, they probably think of doing landscapes or something as their first sort of photography. What sort of took you towards that?
That's a great question. I've always been interested in people, even though I used to be very shy. But I think the camera helped me to, it gave me a reason to approach people in a way, and it gave me a reason to be social. And now I don't think I'm shy anymore, but I'm an outgoing extrovert, an outgoing introvert, as some people would say. And I think that portraiture helps me to discover other universes and worlds that I wouldn't normally encounter. Just by virtue of having a camera in your hand, you're allowed into the most wonderful places. You get to see the most beautiful homes. You travel all around the world. You meet some fantastic people. And so for me, that is just an ideal job, because I get to be creative, travel, be social, push myself, and most of the time it's quite a busy activity, so there's enough work to keep you going.
It's a very emotive sort of art form, isn't it, portrait photography? How do you sort of put your clients at ease when you're working with them? Do you have any sort of tips or things?
Yeah, so there's this belief that you have to put everyone at ease, which yeah, I do actually subscribe to that to an extent. I think, yes, you should try and make people feel comfortable in front of the camera. And I usually do that by just talking to them or meeting them maybe a day before or a few days before the shoot. You know, that way they can relax and they know what to expect. It's always better when there's been an initial contact, you know. But I would also say that it's not necessary to necessarily during a photo shoot entertain someone or make them laugh or make them, you know, or sort of bombard them with all sorts of, you know, things that are going to make them react. I think sometimes it's equally interesting to just have someone exist, even in an awkward silence or, you know, just in a normal setting without it being contrived, and to see how they react and to see what they choose to show you at that time. Because sometimes, you know, you go into shoots and you don't have much time with people. So you don't have time necessarily to make friends with them. So especially with politicians, you don't necessarily want to feed into their PR machine by making them look better than they are. So you just want to see who that person is and what they choose to show you.
And on that, how do you sort of balance it between doing sort of a contracted photo shoot and it also being your artwork?
That's a really great question. And, you know, that's something we grapple with for years, because I think it's very important to use those first few years where you're not really that busy with work to develop your own style, to find out who you are as a photographer. You know, what do you want to photograph? What is your visual signature? And to develop that to such an extent that when people do hire you, they're hiring you for that, you know. So because they've seen how good your group portraits are, for example, in you know, a personal project that you did or an exhibition, they want that look for their magazine. So they hire you to give them that, not for you to just be a simple technician pressing a button, you know, and they tell you exactly what to do. They want you to be able to bring your style to the table, you know. And so I think that's why you need to develop your own voice as a photographer for years and years before you really start branching out into paid work. And obviously that's difficult because, you know, if you're starting as a photographer, you want to start making money straight away. And that's, you know, you don't have the luxury to just sit there taking pictures for yourself the whole time. You've got to pay bills, etc. So it's a real struggle, you know. You kind of do a little bit on the personal work side, and then you have to balance it out with paid work and try and keep your integrity at the same time and not sell out doing things that you don't want to do.
And so you also said that you were self-taught. What were sort of the processes or steps that you went through to develop your skills? Did you go to libraries and read about it? Did you have a mentor? Or what happened?
Yeah, well, I'm from the era of analog. So most photographers nowadays wouldn't start learning photography on an analog camera with film. You know, it's actually so expensive. But I found ways around it at the time by ordering film on bulk from abroad, and they would send you like 100 rolls for about 30 quid or something, you know, and then I would develop them by myself in a dark room and print them myself. And I did that for black and white and color. So I found ways around sort of the expensive side of it, and was able to learn really how it all works by doing it all myself, very hands-on. So you learn about exposure, you learn about color balance, you learn all those things if you're going to actually do the printing yourself. And I didn't really have anyone to teach me. I mean, I had to look things up in books. The internet was sort of getting going at the time. It might sound really old, but yeah. The internet was sort of all right back in 1999, you know, for that. And I joined the Oxford University Photographic Society. So it was an easy way to meet other photographers. But, you know, that was kind of just to get access to the darkroom. And I think it was weird because a lot of photographers didn't really want to tell you how they did things. And I find that that's the sad side of the industry, is that sometimes it's a little bit secretive. You know, people are quite secretive about what they're doing and things like that. So you kind of have to figure things out for yourself. And if you're lucky, you meet people who are happy to tell you, you know.
So what was your first sort of really, paid piece of work that you got?
Gosh, I don't know if I can remember. I did a lot for student magazines. They didn't pay, obviously. But then once I moved to London, the pictures I took at Oxford were picked up by some newspapers. One of them was the Times, you know, and it was my first paycheck in that sense. And when I moved to London, for many years, I did free photo shoots, because then I felt like I didn't have to answer to anyone and I didn't really have to give them what they wanted necessarily. So for modeling agencies, I took pictures of models for their portfolios, and I did that for free for about, for hundreds of different models. And that was a way for me to kind of learn how to handle that situation with.
And what's it like building your network, and how do you go about doing that? Because I assume that's how you get a lot of your work, through word of mouth and networking.
Oh, well, that takes years. I think you just got to be yourself and go out into the world and do your best to meet people and to interact and to obviously treat people well, because that's what's going to bring them back and make them want to work with you again. And, it all goes from there. I think if you are professional, if you treat people well and you produce good work, then people will come back and then they'll talk about you to other people. It's all word of mouth, really.
And I guess as a portrait photographer, what is an average day, if there is one? How do you set a shoot up, and what goes into it?
Wow, that's a really cool question, actually, because no day is the same ever, so there is no average day, which is what I like. It depends. If you're shooting, then, you'll get ready for a non-stop race around, the clock, trying to get as much as you can, because that's your only chance to get those pictures. You only have one shot, kind of thing. So you're trying to get as much as you can out of a shooting day, and those can usually run really late, and you shouldn't really expect to do anything else that day. And then on days when you're editing, I would say those are also very grueling. If you have someone who can help you with all of that, if you, for example, don't really want to get involved with Photoshop, or, spending your time looking at thousands of pictures all the time, then you can delegate all that stuff. But I think it's very good to do it yourself, at least in the beginning, because it really helps you develop a lot. It helps you develop your eye, and all sorts of other skills. So there's a lot of time spent editing. And then, there's all the admin side of it too. You've got to file tax returns. You've got to, look at your equipment and say, can I improve any of my equipment? Do all the research for that. Planning trips. Meeting people. There's lots of meetings involved. Sometimes you wonder if they really need to happen and if they can't just be a phone call. Yeah, so that's that.
And what are some of the personality traits that you see in yourself and others in the industry that really help you thrive?
So I think generosity. I think you've got to be generous with yourself and others. You've got to be willing to give as much as you can of yourself, really, because no one's going to do it for you. And I think people appreciate generosity. Let's say you do a photo shoot, give all the pictures to the person you photographed, not just to the client. Let's say if it's a magazine that commissioned you, you should also try and give those pictures, share those pictures with the people you photograph. You'd be surprised how many photographers don't. You need to be, I think, professional, obviously, treat people well, on time, precise. I think you've got to work with precision and think about everything that you do, because from the beginning, from the inception of a photograph right up to the end when it's sent out to the client or exhibited on the wall, you're going to make millions of decisions. And those millions of decisions are really down to your own taste level. They're really up to you. And so you've got to be quick at making decisions. You've got to stand by your decisions afterwards and justify them. And you need to cut a figure. You know, you need to have an opinion on the world and be willing to stand by that opinion. What are you trying to say? What is your voice as a photographer? Why are you doing this? Are you there to just make pretty pictures? Or are you trying to expose certain truths that are uncomfortable for people to see? Are you trying to help with the environment? Are you trying to, I don't know, there's so many things. You need to cut a figure and have an opinion on things as well.
Photography is very emotive, and what interests me sometimes is that one person can say this is an amazing photo and another might say, oh, I don't really like that photo. But for you, what is something you always look for in your work and you say, yes, I like that photo more than this photo because of X, Y, and Z?
You know, if I could put my finger on that and explain it in words and write a manual, then I might just retire now, because I think you need, it's just one of those things. You see a picture sometimes and you don't really understand why you love it so much or why it really works, but it just does. And then the more you look at it, the more things you see. You know, in my case, I like a picture when it's not too posed. So when you capture something that's not necessarily intentional, it could be that split second between a couple poses or sort of an unguarded moment, or something in the eyes. For me, the eyes are always very important in portraits. I think that's the most important part of the portrait, is the person's eyes. I always want to see their eyes. And so, yes, I always start with the eyes, because I always am fascinated by people's expression in their eyes. And then I think that there's a lot of subconscious things that fall into place that you're not necessarily doing on purpose when you're photographing, but sometimes you create these dynamic lines that run through an image and they just sort of fall into place, you know, and sometimes it only lasts for a few seconds, but, you know, like the leg, the person's leg is symmetrical with the branch of the tree in the background and the foot of the table on the other side of the picture, and it all kind of just falls into this harmonious balance. And those are things that you can't plan in advance. It just happens on the day of the shoot.
Yeah. How difficult is it to work with people who maybe aren't sort of have any like acting skill? You've obviously spoken about capturing their emotion in their eyes, but obviously it's potentially a set-up shot in some regards. How do you sort of overcome that?
Well, you know, start off by letting them sort of do a setup shot and then just relax into something else after a few minutes. You know, you don't have to do a whole photo shoot in one way. So you start off by doing something that's, you know, what they expect, or that's sort of more formal. And then eventually they're going to relax because they'll feel like, okay, you know, they did that stuff that they thought they were going to do. And then it's sort of, if you talk to them a bit and, you know, you show them that you're not nervous, then things will move on. And then that's when things get interesting, I would say.
And what would be some of the biggest positives for you of the industry?
Wow, well, it's so much fun. I love it. It's just so much fun to take pictures and to see them in an exhibition or in a magazine, and to meet all these wonderful people. I mean, really, for the most part, they're wonderful. And to travel around the world, to have an idea. Literally, it could hit you anytime. You might be watching a movie, you might be reading a book, you might be in a bubble bath, and you have this idea, and you think, oh God, that's ridiculous. I don't know if I could ever do that. But then block by block, you build it up, and eventually that idea comes to reality and you make it happen. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things, is that, you know, something that you just thought of, you can actually go all the way through this whole process of making it an actual photograph. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things professionally that you could do.
And then I guess that leads nicely into what are some of the biggest opportunities you've had. I mean, you've worked with some amazing people. There's, you know, on your Instagram, you've Pharrell Williams, I see Ian McKellen, just to name a couple.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the really fun sides of photography, especially if you're into portraits, is that sometimes you're going to meet some really incredible people, and people that you've admired for a long time, and then you become part of their legacy in a way, because you're creating images that are going to be there for a long time after they're gone, you know. So it's truly fantastic. And if someone had told me when I was a teenager that I would be working with all these people, I would have laughed. But yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
And what would be some of the less favorable aspects that you have to deal with in the industry?
I would say long hours. You know, because you're self-employed usually, you're going to be working weekends and evenings, you know, and unless you're really strict with yourself, you'll just be working a lot. And for that reason, you really need to love what you do. And in my case, I do, so I don't mind working a lot. That, for most people, is a downside. And I would say also, you know, you're not necessarily going to have a steady stream of income ever. You know, things, even for the top level photographers, they go through cycles. You know, you always go through cycles where you might be making a lot of money for a few weeks, and then for a couple months after that, you're not really making any money, you know, so you've got to be good at managing that side of things.
And what would be something that's not in the job description that you have to deal with, maybe every now and then, or quite often?
Good question. Well, I think dealing with people's insecurities is something that I've realized is increasingly part of the job, and some of the insecurities then, you know, create all sorts of problems, because it creates I think, you know, people's egos get in the way and things like that. So you can sometimes have situations where people are not comfortable with the way they look, or they're very guarded about what pictures can be shown, etc. And in those cases, I think you've just got to respect those wishes and just go ahead and do what they like. You know, it's a shame that some people would be that way, because most of the time those insecurities are unjustified, and they actually look fantastic, but they in their head don't realize it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You spoke a little bit earlier about some of the other aspects of the industry that you have to deal with, such as editing, organizing stuff. What sort of balance is it between doing all those things, and how much time do you actually spend doing what you love, or of taking the pictures?
That's a great question. I mean, it's really down to you. You know, are you happy to do everything from start to finish by yourself, or would you rather delegate, and are you able to trust someone else to do the editing for you? Because it's true, if you spend all your time editing and retouching photos, then you're no longer a photographer, you're a retoucher, you know, so you've got to make sure that the balance is always on the side of shooting, and that you're spending most of your time conceptualizing photos and taking photos rather than photoshopping them afterwards. And so, yeah, I think that's a that's a balance which people struggle with a lot of the time, is especially if they're working by themselves, you know. So sometimes it's really great to find someone you trust to do all your editing, who will second guess everything that you like and need, and who will understand your aesthetic and just do the work the way you want them to. Yeah.
And obviously creating your own business, did you sort of just learn as you went, or did you have anyone who gave you some tips about creating your own portrait photography business?
No, I think you just learn as you go along. Yeah, I just I read a lot of newspapers, magazines. I go to a lot of exhibitions. I love art shows and photography shows. I go to as much as I can. I think you just develop an understanding of what's going on, of the industry and all of that quite quickly if you just keep your eyes open and look.
How has the rise of the digital world impacted what you do and how you do it? Because obviously magazines are maybe less and less of a thing these days, whereas social media and online publications have really risen. Have you had to change anything?
Oh yeah, I mean, I started out shooting on film, so I had to change everything. And it took me a really long time to transition from film to digital, from analog to digital. Fully. And for a few years, I was kind of straddling both. I was sort of dipping my toes into digital, but I was still shooting the important stuff on film. And eventually, I felt that the digital cameras had caught up enough that it was fine to just shoot everything on digital. And then the pressures of magazines made it such that I couldn't shoot on film anymore because there was such a quick turnaround. For example, there's this one picture that I took, which was probably my first viral photo, which is of the Vogue, all the international editors of Vogue in one photo. How many were there? I think 17 of them.
Wow.
Including Anna Wintour and editors from all other editions. And Vogue wanted that picture to be released half an hour after the photo shoot.
Oh my word.
And so, the planning had to be really quite minute in advance. You had to really plan everything in advance. And I got there literally 12 hours before to practice the whole process and to practice the lighting. And I got photography students to come and sit in so that I could test everything on them. And then by the time the editors arrived, it was just a very smooth process. But then, because it's digital, they expected you to be able to do it so quickly. And the problem is that with group portraits, a lot of the time they require a lot of post-production because sometimes people swap bits and pieces out from different pictures. But in this case, they didn't allow for that. So, it was a clear example of when digital kind of shot you in the foot because the expectations were so high and they wanted to get the picture out to the news agency by a certain deadline, and you just had to do it very quickly.
Are there any, obviously within portrait photography itself, are there any industries that you particularly like?
Gosh, yeah, there's so much because really, I mean, you've got a camera and you go into all these different worlds, as I said, so there is fashion, obviously. Although actually it's not really my favorite. I just am interested in people, so it doesn't matter the industry. So that's the first thing for me is it's always about the person, not the industry. But because I work a lot with magazines like Vanity Fair, they send me to Switzerland a lot to photograph people in the watchmaking industry because they have this watch supplement twice a year that I do a lot of pictures for. And so I've discovered quite a lot about the watch industry, which I find fascinating because I'm actually from Geneva myself. So, I grew up around all that stuff. But now I actually have a much better understanding of just how fascinating it is. It also brings out my nerdy side a little bit. Yeah. But then I also recently did a shoot with the NHS during COVID. At the end of the first wave, I went into some of the hospitals in London to photograph staff from a broad range of people who make hospitals function, including receptionists and porters and paramedics, midwives, cooks, cleaners, everything from, everyone in the hospital. And that was an eye-opener. I spent a few days with them and I just saw how how many people are needed to, so many different job descriptions are needed to make a hospital function. It's fascinating.
And would you still go into the industry knowing everything you know now?
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't change a thing. I don't think, I think that I would have done less fashion, and I would have just focused more on portraiture from the start, I think. And that's because when I look at my pictures, my old pictures, I would say that the portraits are the ones that still speak to me, whereas the fashion ones kind of lose relevance, you know. And that to me indicates that I'm not a fashion photographer, because I think true fashion photographers, their pictures are timeless, you know. And for me, the pictures that I find of mine that have most lasting quality are the portraits, and that's because I think that's where my heart really is. So, but that's fine, you know. I know that now, and I'm 40 years old. I've still got a few years in me, I think. So I've got time to. Hopefully, I've got time to focus more on the portrait side of things.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Frederic. I really enjoyed chatting to you and learning all about your career.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much again. It's been brilliant to hear your story. Where can people find you on Instagram or other social medias or anywhere online?
Yeah, so my Instagram is at Frederic Aranda, and I have a website, fredericaranda.com. And yes, those are the two main things, really.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frederic.
Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.
Bye.